Hi, it's Miss Mason, reading Counting by Sevens by the awesome Holly Goldberg Sloan. Today we'll be reading chapters 53 to 56. Chapter 53. For the next 17 days, Dell, and I become experts in the green garden trash cans. In our town, trash is separated, with blue cans for recycling and green for anything from the yard. Black is for everything else. My first observation: the green receptacles are not always filled with just cut grass and dead flowers. I found spaghetti in there, and all other kinds of objectionable things. Some of them are beyond creepy. But for the most part, the people of Bakersfield, California, are following the rules of rubbish, meaning they are tossing their garden waste in the right direction. And this stuff is mostly alive. Patty doesn't want any more tubs or containers in the apartment. She put her foot down on that. And Dell only has his room down the hall, where Sadhu has strict rules. Again, Kwang Ha is the one who has the answer. Take everything up to the roof. No one goes up there. He hasn't been back since we put the broken glass on the skylight, but he obviously remembers what a wide open space it is. So now there are pots and containers all over the flat space. With the rooting hormone and so much full sun and water, I've got a mini nursery going. And then we lose almost all of the plants. There's a light rain, and someone named S. Gachow in unit number 21 reports a small leak in the ceiling in his bathroom. He calls the bank, and they don't notify the building rep. They notify their repairman. Patty and I are at the salon, and of course I know nothing about this until it is all too late. A roofer comes and can't make heads or tails out of the containers with the cuttings. To him, it just looks like a big mess that's getting in the way of an area he needs to tar. He gets back in touch with the bank, and apparently someone named Chad Dewey says nothing should be up there. So the workers gather all the plants that are growing, or at least trying to form roots, and carry them downstairs where they're deposited in the dumpster. I come home to the crime scene. Today the city picked up the trash. I had to piece together the sequence of events, and when I get to the bottom of it, I believe the plant loss is not just a defeat, it's a sign. I'm not really going to live at the Gardens of Glenwood for much longer. Very soon I'm going to be placed in a foster home. I'm going to be sent back to school. What's going on here will end. For me at least. When I go see Dell for counseling the next day, I tell him, I can't return to the past. Having a garden in the courtyard will not ever be the same as what was in my backyard at home. Dell only nods and looks sweaty. Later I see Dell hand Mai an envelope when he comes over for dinner. And then when I go to bed, I find the note on my pillow. It reads, Willow, when they find the place for you, and it will be a great place and it will be right for you, I know that. I want you to try to take Cheddar with you. I will call Lenore and say that the cat is a therapy dog. Yours in friendship, Dell Duke. He said the cat was his therapy dog. I appreciate his support, but I sincerely hope that he's not running this show. 2 days pass, and instead of taking the bus home from the nail salon, I go to Southside Nursery. I find Henry and I explain about the sunflowers and losing my clippings, and I ask for advice. He has to go into the back because a truck is delivering something. I wait. There are cartons of ladybugs for sale on the counter, and I decide to buy one. They're usually burnt orange, but as they peer through the mesh that covers the container, the little bugs are moving around in curls of wood look bright red. I know what Patty would say. Lucky. And she would be right, because only a few minutes later Henry comes back in and says he's going to help me. He'll stop by after work and take a look what I've got going on. I feel relieved, which feels strange. I walk back to the Gardens of Glenwood and I try to move in a very careful way, because I don't want to jiggle the ladybugs. When I come to the door, Kwang Ha, who is on the couch as usual, sees the container in my hands and says, Did you bring home food? I say, I brought home insects, but I smile, and I don't even realize it until I catch sight of myself in the mirror. I'm surprised. I look different when I smile. Maybe everyone does. I don't go to the nail salon this morning. I stay back to wait for the plant delivery. Henry came yesterday and took a look. He said he'd bring me some things. But it's not just the regular nursery van that arrives at 10:07 a.m. What pulls up is a large truck, and there's a forklift in the back. A van follows with 4 workers. I go out to the street and Henry and his cousin Phil are just lowering the lift gate. In the truck I see a big box of timber bamboo. It is being transported on its side. Standing upright, it would be over 20 feet tall. There are other plants in the truck. Pink stripe Forunium, a diverse selection of flowering vines to climb up the metal poles to the 2nd story. Ground cover. Even a 3-year-old cherry tree. I am overwhelmed. But there isn't time to express it because there's a lot to be done. The 4 workers cut down the sunflowers. That would have been sad, except it isn't now. We decide to hang the long stalks on the 2nd floor balcony. The large flowers are the size of human heads. The bright yellow petals are now dried and the centers are dark. Henry has green twine and I'm in charge of that project, while down below the workers dig a huge hole because this bamboo they brought in is serious business. While I'm tying the sunflower stalks to the railing, Henry comes to tell me that this is all a gift. I try to say thank you, but the words are stuck. My mouth is open, and I'm suddenly some kind of fish out of water. You can't see the hook, but it must be in my cheek. Or maybe it's in my heart, because that's being pulled. Henry puts his arm around my shoulder and whispers, "You're welcome." It takes almost 4 hours to plant all of the stuff, but the day is not over. As another surprise, Lorenzo from Bakersfield Electric brings a set of solar-powered lights, which at night will send shafts up through the foliage into the starry sky. It is all so much more than I hoped for. Lorenzo says that the nursery guys called him. He explains something about something called the favor bank. I hadn't heard about this before, but I'm thinking that I have a lot of accounts with people at this point. I watch as Lorenzo puts the light fixtures in place, but I can't stop myself and end up moving them around so they're just where I think they should be. I explain that I like to see space in terms of triangles, and he listens for a while and then laughs. When we finish, he gives me his card and says he wants to talk to me about a big lighting job he's bidding on in the new shopping complex. I tell him I'd be glad to look at his design sketches. It can be part of my favor bank. After he's gone, I water everything with the hose Henry left for me. I'm just finishing when Mai comes down the sidewalk. I go out through the gate and she follows me inside, and I wish that Henry and Phil and Lorenzo and the guys had all stayed. They deserve to see the look on her face. We sit on the stairs and watch as people arrive home. Everyone is pretty much stunned. I decide not to run my mile, so I'm here when Kwang Ha comes in. He doesn't say a single word. I wait. He's still silent as he takes a seat next to me on the stairs. More silence. Then he turns and says, "I don't want to know how you did it. I want to believe that you're magic." Maybe it's because he's older and a boy, and maybe because he wasn't really on board with me coming to stay with them. I feel something wash over me when I hear the words. I think the feeling is acceptance. The 3 of us are all together on the steps when Dell comes in from the carport. I guess he knew something was going to happen. He says that Henry called him. I can't believe he was able to keep any kind of secret. Dell is very, very happy when he sees the plants. Ma uses Dell's cell phone to tell her mom to come home early. She wants her to get a view of this garden in the daylight. Patty makes it to the apartment just as the horizon is going purple. There are streaks of color overhead as she looks up into the darkening sky. She says, "It is no longer wrong to call this place the Gardens of Glenwood." We go upstairs together and I take Cheddar and lie down on my bed. I'm exhausted. So is Cheddar, I think, but snoozing is his default setting, so I can't be sure. I fall asleep even though I haven't eaten dinner, and it's barely dark outside. I wake up to the sound of the television and the smell of popcorn. Kwang Ha appears in the doorway and says, "Dell put the building rep sign again in front of the best parking spot." We look right at each other. We're laughing, but with our eyes. Chapter 54. Dell got the mail. It was always bad news, so sometimes days went by before he bothered to take out his strangely sharp little key and open the metal box by the front gate. The mailbox was stuffed. As always, there were overdue bills mixed with throwaway flyers, printed with cheap black ink that rubbed off onto his fingers. But today there was something more. He held a letter addressed to Patty Nguyen in his hands. She didn't get mail here. He read the return address, Kern County Department of Child Services. And he suddenly felt queasy. He was sweating and dizzy. Maybe he should just leave. He could drive off and never come back. And if he did, at least the cat would be covered. He couldn't imagine a world where Willow wouldn't figure out a place for the furball. Dell had delivered the letter to Patty, and then he'd gone straight down the hall to his room. Now he was in bed and his laptop was open. He was staring at the Kern County Child Services website. In the state of California, a person could have temporary custody of a ward at the state for a few weeks, or under special circumstances, for several months. But after that, the goal was for permanency. The hope was that a guardian would step forward. Dell felt his left leg twitch, and then it jerked spontaneously, like he was kicking a soccer ball. Ever since he started jogging, his limbs seemed to function independently from the rest of his body. Now, even lying down, it was as if his feet were trying to step forward. Was it possible he could become the guardian of a 12-year-old? Even if he wanted to. And he didn't really, did he? He had debt, and barely any job security, and he'd never even been able to follow through on getting his coffee card stamped correctly at the little place where he sometimes got a morning cup of hot brew. But hadn't things changed? Wasn't he now the building rep for the Gardens of Glenwood? Hadn't he been driving the two Nguyen kids to school every day? Plus, he wasn't just holding down a job, he was possibly getting better at it. Wasn't he the one who supervised the biggest transformation that had ever occurred at the apartment building? Okay, so maybe he hadn't supervised, but he was at least part of it. He did operate the rototiller. Dell shut his laptop, but his legs kept twitching. No one knew that they had gotten close, and now Ohio was the first person Patty needed to talk to. His cell phone rang, but he didn't answer. She knew that if he was driving, he couldn't pick up. But he would. He'd call her back and they would figure it out, the two of them, what to do. It was December, and the brutal heat that was only the real constant for months had finally broken the week before. It was like someone flipped a switch and changed the season. Nights were now suddenly cool, and fans and air conditioners had finally been put away for their 4-month-long electronic hibernation. Patty slipped out of her too tight shoes, her feet seemed to be growing, and stared at the letter from the state of California. It was for the custody hearing. It had twice been postponed. Now it was real. Decisions had to be made. She folded the letter in half and promised herself that she'd do the right thing. Chapter 55. As we were climbing into the bunk beds, I explained to Mai that everything is in shock, which happens when a plant is first put down into new soil. I know from experience that some things will thrive and others will wither. Only time will expose the difference. Balance is critical in the natural world. I'm still feeling the triumph of the garden the next day when I get the news. I don't like Lenore Cole from Jameson, but in the name of fairness, I admit it would be hard to build a case that she isn't doing her job. She has found a place for me. It's permanent. She has come over today to the nail salon to tell me in person. She then asked me if there's anything that I need. We've been speaking outside in the parking lot, but Patty must know. I've been with them for almost 3 months. It was always temporary. Patty had never met me until the day a hospital supply truck drove through a red light. I understand better than anybody how much she's done for me. These are the facts. I'm going to be placed in a group foster care home on 7th Street. It figures that it wouldn't be 8th Street or 9th Street. She says it's okay for me to cry. I tell her that I'm fine. I say that I would like to go to the library, and she volunteers to take me. I'd like to be around books. When Lenore and I are ready to leave, Patty tells me that Dell will pick me up at the library after work. I won't have to take the bus. I say thank you, and we go to Lenore's car. I feel numb, but I'm moving on. That's how Lenore puts it when we get into her car. Her exact words are, "It's time to move on." It feels like something I might hear in a cafeteria lunch line when I've stared too long at the mysterious noodle dish. And then Lenore adds, "Transitions are important. We want you to spend the morning at Jameson tomorrow, and then go to the hearing in the afternoon." So that's moving on. It means this is happening right away. This surprises me. I thought when she told me she meant in 5 days or 2 weeks. Not tomorrow. Lenore is a professional, and she must have some experience in all of this. It might be like ripping off a Band-Aid quickly. It doesn't hurt as much because a large component in pain has to do with anticipation. Maybe that's why she didn't tell me until now. I say goodbye to Lenore and I go into the library. Once I get inside, I hold my hands right up close to my face. I'm breathing too fast, but I'm not crying. I'm thinking about Mai and Kwang Ha and Patty and Dell. They're taking me away from these people, and I don't think I can live now without them. I go straight to my favorite area, which is upstairs in the corner next to the window. The light floods this spot. I get a book on astrophysics. I haven't thought of big picture concepts in a long time. Maybe I've been too focused on the smaller things. I had my mind wrapped around specifics. Reading about galaxies and cosmic microwaves helps me to breathe more easily. I'm putting my face in the universe into perspective. I'm putting my place in the universe into perspective. I'm stardust. I'm golden brown. I'm just one small bit in a vast expanse. When the time is right, I go sit outside on the steps. I think about the Nuyens. Will they move out of the gardens? Will Dell go back to number 28? Maybe they can rent another apartment and stay in the complex. Mai won't just miss me, she's really going to miss the bunk beds in the closet. And what about Cheddar? If they stay, I can come visit on weekends. I could still help with the garden. I could walk or even call Hyro to drive me over in his taxi. I could increase my running and plot out a new loop that takes me right by the gardens of Glenwood. Dell suddenly appears. I didn't see him coming. Did he sneak up on me, or am I not seeing things now? He sits down next to me, but he doesn't say anything. Then he puts his head between his knees and starts to cry. It sounds like he's choking to death. I'm right next to him and I do what my mother would have done. I put my arm around his shoulder and softly whisper, "I'm all right. It's going to be okay." And that breaks him completely. He cries harder. He lifts his face and looks at me. I still have my arm encircling his hunched back. But I see something in his eyes. He looks heartbroken. I know the look. Chapter 56. Patty closed the nail salon early and took the bus home. It was cloudy outside and the wind was blowing hard down the valley. There was dust and sand in the air, and when her teeth met she felt the grit. She could taste it when she swallowed. Patty came through the door of the apartment and saw Kwang Ha at the table doing his homework. He was never at the table doing his homework. He was always watching TV. But he barely looked up as she came in. He didn't say a thing. Patty noticed that his foot was twitching, back and forth, not shaking, but close. She looked down the hall. Mai was in her room in the upper bunk bed. She had her face close to the wall and the cat held tight to her chest. So they knew. Patty went down the hall and stood in the doorway. "We're going to figure it all out." She walked to the bed and put her hand on her daughter's silky head of hair. "It's temporary." Suddenly Kwang Ha's voice could be heard. He was loud. "That's what you say about everything. Temporary. Well, if you do something long enough, you don't get to use that word anymore." Patty went back to the living room and stood in front of her son. Mai appeared behind her. Kwang Ha looked up at both of them. His eyes were large and defiant. But his voice was like a small boy's, not a teenage kid's. "We shouldn't let her go." Patty put her arm around her son, and they stayed that way for a long time. Mai came over and leaned against them. Outside, the gusts picked up. A window was open in the kitchen and they could hear a sound. It was different. It was something new to add to the mix of street noise and people. It was the bamboo in the new garden. They could hear the rustling of 1,000 leaves. Dell woke up in the middle of the night. He tried to get back to sleep but tossed and turned so many times that it started to feel like exercise. At 2:47 he was worn out, but still wide awake, so he got up. He stayed in his sweatpants and t-shirt, but pulled on his shoes and a windbreaker. He then went downstairs to the courtyard. It was cold out, and he could see his breath as he made his way to the coiled green hose. Standing in the light of a partial moon, he watched the water come out in gushes of icy silver. And even though he was freezing cold, Dell took his time watering Willow's new garden. The honeysuckle vines were taller than him now, and as he looked them over he realized that one of the buds was beginning to open. He knew for certain that it would be magnificent.